And that time, okay. Oh, sorry. Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. She's coming to you live from her office. Can I say this? Your office at Mass General?
Mm-hmm.
From her office at Mass General Hospital. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Mass General telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients, and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist setting. We support a number of traditional MedTech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for the clinician and for the patients. You can find us giving local, national, and international talks, and you can look for our first ever Springer textbook on digital health and cardiovascular medicine. Where is that, Ami? The digital health textbook?
It is in your email box for proofing and everybody else's. So we are ahead of schedule, it turns out, with Springer. They're very happy with us.
Oh, okay. So sooner than we thought. Yay, but we have been working on it for a little bit. MedTech Insights is live, a weekly interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview 2 guest leaders in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon. You can watch us live through MedTech Insights Facebook, my or Ami's Facebook pages, Vanguard.Health YouTube, and my personal LinkedIn, and a few other places. When you tune in live, you can write comments in any of these places. LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We try to feature your questions on the show and incorporate your questions to our guests. So we love when you write comments, when you tell us who you are, when you tell us where you're watching from, and we love when you participate in the conversation. So please write comments. All shows are recorded and available after the fact at our website, Vanguard.Health/MedTech Insights. Be sure to keep up with us by joining our mailing list and looking for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Over to you, Ami.
Great. Excited to be here today. We've got 2 great guests with us. As always, really, each week is fun and different. So to just start with, for housekeeping, Dr. Joe, myself, and our 2 guests today are representing our own opinions and not that of any of the institutions for whom we work or with whom we collaborate. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we have Dr. Salvatore Viscomi, and we have Mayfield Fund partner Ursheet Parikh. We'll bring Dr. Viscomi on first. Dr. Viscomi is a practicing physician, a professor, researcher, and an entrepreneur. He currently leads GoodCell's product line of genetic and biomarker testing, developing a healthcare platform that harnesses the power of blood to both inform and restore health. I'm so excited about hearing about restoring health. Previously, Dr. Viscomi spent 14 years here as a member of the Harvard Medical School's faculty, and concurrently he was a clinician at Brigham and Women's Hospital, where I also trained. And in that capacity, he held various administrative and clinical roles, including director of admissions of the Harvard residency program. We are incredibly excited to have Dr. Viscomi join us today. So why don't we go ahead and we'll bring him on.
That's wonderful.
Salvatore, great to have you with us.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So this is exciting because we get a chance to really think about what our blood offers us, right? What can we know? How early can we know things? And then once that happens, the big question is, and you talk about informing future health, informing current health, and then even restoring health. So maybe for our audience, if you wouldn't mind to do 2 things. One is we love the origin story, and you're an MD who became an entrepreneur. So if you could tell a little bit about your story as to how you ended up being the CMO of GoodCell, and then we can dive into a little bit into some of the things that GoodCell does.
Sure. So I'm a physician by training, as you mentioned. My specialty has been in imaging and image-guided therapy. But I was a serial entrepreneur pretty early on. As a 3rd-year resident at Brigham, I had an idea with some co-residents about offering teleradiology at a time in 2004, where it was really kind of an unknown concept that you would outsource health. And through some persuasion, we ultimately started the first academic teleradiology network in the world. And for me, that experience about being innovative and starting something that was really exciting. And I was able to do that in radiology, and then most recently, I did it through a medical device company, a plasma thawing device that's on the market now. And then most recently with GoodCell, where I joined initially as an advisor and an early investor to become the chief medical officer. It's in a way similar to my world of imaging, because we did a lot of, as you know, in radiology, do a lot of preventative medicine with screening through imaging, MRIs, CAT scans, mammography. There's other ways of screening for diseases on a more precise way, I would say. And so GoodCell was that a possibility. So it was the opportunity to really use the power of blood and all its components. And those components are obviously the ability to store and isolate stem cells and, for even T cells for future therapy. The ability to look at our genetics, but not only genetics in the way that most people think about it, what's inherited from our parents, but different types of genetics that's somatic, that's acquired in our lifetime through either random events or through insults that causes damage that accumulates and propagates in our blood. And then ultimately in our plasma, there are biomarkers, things that a lot of people know about, like vitamin D and lipids, but there are also some esoteric ones that are coming out around Alzheimer's disease about measuring specific types of beta amyloid and how those levels impact your risk of developing chronic diseases.
So this is phenomenal, and there's so much for us to unpack here. So I love, first of all, that background, right? Because so the name was great, Jennifer, by the way. They called them Brigham Night Watch, right? Which was just a great concept of how this teleradiology network that were really developed by kind of residents in the trenches who were saying, look, there's got to be better ways of doing this. And the concept of teleradiology really, blossomed right around the time that Dr. Viscomi was doing this. And so now it's usual, right? It was the easiest thing during COVID for radiologists to continue to do their work because they were able to do this at a distance. I love applying the idea, however, that we had in radiology, which is there are signals that are early, that we can see things and then we follow. There are signals that we see during treatment, and people who think about cancer treatment especially are used to this idea, right? We're treating you and we continue to follow with imaging to see how things go. And now really taking it down to the cellular level and saying, hey, what about my own personal ability to respond to this drug? So what I'd love to do is break this down to two things for our audience. The first, Dr. Viscomi, is let's talk a little bit about the idea of if you are undergoing therapy, is there a way for us to take a look at our blood and say, this therapy is or is not doing the job, or may not be doing the job that we want it to do? Maybe let's address that first, and then we can go next to genetic changes that happen later in life.
Sure. So, so one of the things with therapy is that we've looked at therapy and then we measure on imaging or other parameters to see if someone's doing better or worse, depending on the size of a mass. But the therapy also, while maybe treating one thing, may be affecting our cells in another way. It may be causing damage to certain cells that we're now able to measure. So we have certain progenitor cells in our blood that create other cells, macrophages, monocytes that protect us with some damage that can be induced even by therapy. We can measure that, and and we can measure how this propagation occurs and how much of our cell fraction is involved. The importance of this is because this puts people at risk for diseases that are unrelated to the initial therapy. So it's been found that people that have this clonal process in their blood are 4 times risk for cardiovascular disease, 13 times risk for blood cancers. They're at risk for having severe manifestations of COVID-19, and they're at risk for autoimmune diseases that it may occur in younger people and may be refractory to therapy. So we need to look at not only what is predisposing us to diseases that we inherit, but also what is happening day to day and how do we track it over time? Because that's the best way to identify early on when these processes may be important to intervene on.
So interesting. So really, when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about what are the new drugs coming to market? What are the aggressive drugs that we need sometimes to treat a variety of different diseases? But when we're doing that, how are they affecting the rest of the body, right? And this is an attempt to say, we can see what kind of changes might be happening and then translate that. You wonder partly whether or not that eventually will be part of that FDA process and whether we can get drugs for people who are in trouble to market faster by having some markers that say, hey, no, this has a great safety profile, whereas this one over here doesn't. Let's take a little bit longer on looking at that one. And so I think there's a lot of potential for the future. I think, Salvatore, do you have a slide or two that we could use to talk about some of the things that GoodCell does? Because even though we live in this world, for some of our guests out there, it might be helpful to have a visual to also look at.
Sure, I'll share my screen.
And while Salvatore is sharing his screen, I just want to say that we're excited to have all of our audience out there watching. We have Brian Wong. Okay, I love and adore Brian. I am just going to say that my friend Tito Jackson recently told me about the gang credentials, the MD, MPH, lots of things that doctors put after their name. So Brian Wong, MD, MPH, watching from Houston, Texas, also the founder of Diagnose. Thank you, Brian, for watching. We love and adore having you watch our show. We have Rajesh Gupta. He's watching from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. Rajesh is a senior data scientist at Apple. So thank you, Rajesh. Hopefully Apple can get some good insights from our guest. We have Alice Masulam. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm botching your name. Hi, Alice. You're a PharmD watching from Beirut, Lebanon. We'd love to hear, Alice, what's going on in Beirut and, what you're thinking about in terms of genomics, investments in genomics, digital health and testing. And we'd love to hear that from our audience. So thank you. I am going to bring Salvatore's slides into the stream. So we can see your slides, Salvatore.
Oh, great. So just quickly going through GoodCell's mission is really to empower individuals to live longer and healthier lives by leveraging their own blood for dynamic and comprehensive genomics and cell-based therapy. So the platform really is three components, and we'll go through a bit here. The first one is the ability from a blood draw to be able to isolate and store cells that'll be important for future therapy should you need them. For yourself and perhaps for your family members, your own blood is going to be your own best treatment. Secondly, the component is DNA, but we look at DNA differently than others. In addition to the inherited predisposition to diseases that many people look at, we really specialize in looking at what is accumulated, what is dynamic, what is changing in our genes that puts us at risk for future disease. And then finally, like we talked about before, what's in our plasma? And there's a tremendous amount of biomarkers that are really important. There's things that many people are familiar with, and then there are new biomarkers that are coming out every day. And it's really the power here is the combination of these three things.
Yeah.
If you take the data from our cells, the two types of genetics, and all the biomarkers, and you can really have an incredible predictive models for risk for disease, as opposed to using these things in isolation.
So conceptually, will you go back for 1 second, just so we can break that down from the stem cell perspective? We're saying, give us your cells when you're young as you can and healthy, because someday we may be able to do things with them to help treat something that happens to you. We're going to hold on to that, and then there are different fields that have been working on it. For the DNA, absolutely. I'm a congenital heart disease doctor. And so I always think, well, your DNA is your DNA. And if you had a mutation, you had a mutation when you were born. And you're telling us something different, which is things are changing. Things are changing and mutations are happening in our DNA as we get older and have different environmental triggers. Is that right?
That was kind of a mind shift for me, actually.
Yeah.
I feel like as a doctor, I'm always learning things. Okay.
I think this is important.
It's fascinating for me too. And in fact, this is what led me to leave the world of imaging and join the world of genetics and GoodCell, because of this fascinating technology that we have proprietary IP around. And it's really this idea that certain cells in our blood, either through random events or through stressors like smoking, chemotherapy, radiation, some of these cells may develop mutations that allow them to have an advantage compared to their peers to self-renew, and they can propagate. And what this means is that they become an increasingly larger fraction of our blood. And so that's interesting from a science perspective. What does this mean on a clinical basis? There have been several published studies in the New England Journal of Medicine that have shown that people that had this phenomenon that we call clonal hematopoiesis of indeterminate potential, a really challenging name for the audience, but really what it means is that there are certain families of cells in our blood that are at an advantage and they're multiplying faster. If people have this process going on, they're at increased risk of overall mortality. They have an increased risk for cardiovascular disease and stroke. And in fact, the highest risk group is for early MI is people in their 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's a particular area of interest for you, Ami.
That
Because
is.
of South
that is.
Asians.
The South Asians really have a high risk in that, period of time as well. So.
And it's a little unclear, I think. Or maybe you're going to say it's unclear why.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's always multifactorial reasons, right, that people develop disease. And to be able to have CHIP, see, this is why we use acronyms, right? CHIP is just easier to say.
It used to be a Medicaid program for kids.
That was S-CHIP. That was a good program, actually.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Or
sorry, going back to Salvatore. However, I think this concept is excellent.
Yeah, and then more recently, so the cardiovascular risk and blood cancer risk has been known for several years, but most recently in this past year, we have found that people that have this phenomenon of these cells in their blood are at risk for having severe COVID-19 disease. So what differentiates people from having the sniffles versus ICU? This may play a role in some people. And then a concept that I'm very excited about is inflammatory aging or inflammaging. The idea is that inflammation is thought of as a positive thing in the acute setting. It helps you defend yourself against things. The problem is that for some people, their inflammation tends to be at a higher level overall and dysfunctional. And that has an impact on many systems that you would not normally think about for inflammation. So for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, for Alzheimer's disease, these are all diseases that are mediated in part to inflammatory markers like just IL-6 and IL-8, which people with CHIP have higher levels of. And so the idea is, this is an idea to identify who's at higher risk for these things, but also potentially in the future to target therapies around this. And the way to do that is that people that you identify having this process may benefit from anti-inflammatory treatment at a younger age to slow down this process. So the one thing about this that's interesting to me is that people with CHIP have abnormal inflammation, right? So they promotes inflammation, but the inflammatory state, so the more inflammation you have, also promotes these cells from self-renewing. Mm-hmm. And so it's this cascade of events, and it's self-perpetuating that this cycle of inflammation promotes CHIP, CHIP promotes inflammation, and all this promotes chronic diseases.
Yeah. Well, this is phenomenal. So I can see Ursheet backstage, and he is ready. So let me just quickly introduce him. Ursheet
Before
Parikh.
you introduce him, I'm just going to say, I know so many people watching today, so many great people watching today. Irma Rastigayeva is watching from the Boston area. Glad to join. Thank you, Irma, for watching. Great to see you. Janice McCallum is watching also from Boston. Thanks, Janice. Christine Rebeck is an occupational therapist from Hershey, Pennsylvania. We do love Hershey, Pennsylvania. There's strong academic centers out there.
So you're on a roll with just strong female leaders in a row that you're mentioning here. We're so happy to have all of you watching.
Well, also Hershey, Pennsylvania, is that's where Hershey chocolate is, right? And then there's our...
Yes, Jen.
Okay. I'm from Mississippi, so I'm still
That's
learning.
right. Yes, no, you're exactly
this is
right.
what
They also have a theme park, actually.
I've always wanted to see the theme park. Sorry, we digress. Okay.
All right, Ursheet. So let's bring out Ursheet because I think he's ready to join this conversation. Ursheet Parikh is a partner at the Mayfield Fund. Mayfield is the founding venture capital firm of technology and healthcare. Has about 50 plus year track record of successful investing, and really at the inception stage in iconic enterprise, consumer, and engineering biology companies. Ursheet leads the healthcare practice for Mayfield. His investments, and some of the ones we'll talk about now, because they really dovetail nicely with GoodCell in this concept, include thinking about Cuventus for AI in healthcare, FoodSmart to reverse metabolic disease, Mammoth Biosciences, talking about CRISPR. As over the past few weeks, it's come up a lot. And then Nasos, neuromodulation for brain to control inflammation. So I think there's really, a lot that we can talk about there with Ursheet. So why don't we go ahead and bring him on? Such an honor to have you with us.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Good to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you. So we know you well, but maybe just for our audience, will you tell us a little bit about kind of your course and how you got to Mayfield and really kind of into healthcare investing, and especially that at the inception stage, right? When something new was about to happen and that field was going to transform, Mayfield's there. And in healthcare,
Beautiful.
you're there, right? So how one does that, but maybe just take us on your bio a little bit, just up until how you got here, and then we can dive into some of the technologies.
Sure. I'll try to make it really brief. I grew up as a computer scientist, went, and worked in tech. Did startups, was an executive, had a company that was a cloud storage company and one of the larger first-gen cloud storage computing companies that was acquired by Microsoft. And then I was trying to figure out what to do really. And then I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And what I kind of realized was what I really liked was this process of creation. Because if the foundation is not right in a company, the odds that it can go and make the impact 7-10 years later is just very low. And ended up joining one of our investors at Store Simple, which was Mayfield. And then as I kind of came to Mayfield, Mayfield's done well over the years. It was a founding investor, not just in a lot of tech companies, but even in companies like Amgen, Genentech, Intuitive Surgical, Applied Biosystems, Heartstream. Heartstream was done simply because we didn't know what the business model was, but that it was going to save lives. That was the view with the need for a defib. And software. And a lot of healthcare innovation sort of became about creating products and selling them to other large companies. But in the last decade, we saw digital transformation happening, where you could digitize biology very easily. You had the EMR system that brought all the data online. But along with that, cost of sequencing went down. You had wearables, biosensors, and you could even sequence cells at an individual level. You now have sensors, which actually, we have one of the companies that is going to announce soon, which is in clinical trials, showing how you can do non-invasive continuous glucose monitoring, that kind of stuff. So digitizing biology allows for all the technologies of computer science to be applied now to the data of our living state, right? And then in parallel, we saw an amazing set of engineering biology technologies that were also happening. So this included things like neuromodulation, companies like Nasos, which we can talk about, but also cell engineering, gene editing, DNA synthesis, tissue sort of printing, right? So now it feels that you can take sort of the ability to digitize and then engineer and iteratively build new solutions, new diagnostics, therapeutics. This is actually also transforming, other industries like food and materials as well. But what this meant is that it sort of fundamentally changed how we thought about the next generation of sort of healthcare companies. And it was no longer about having cool science and some interesting FDA data and then selling it to a large company. And it was about founders really sort of starting with the intent of getting to patients very quickly and then thinking of themselves as a platform. And, if we, and this was like 10 years ago, very few people were thinking about it. Now a lot more are doing it. But if it wasn't for people thinking like that, then we would not have a Moderna and getting onto the other side of the pandemic. And so we see that becoming the more mainstream way of helping build companies. And so, yeah, every day, the more I learn, the less I know, because all I get to know is what I don't know.
That is something to live by, right? The more I learn, the less I know. It's so true. I love the concept, right? The concept that we really used to be in healthcare, very product driven. And really, you can see the change in every week that we talk. You can see the change to being platform driven. The other thing that I think changes, and in some of the companies we'll talk about that you are interested in, Ursheet, we see this, which is once you establish the platform in one type of disease process and get it right, it is very often applicable across disease processes. And so we are advancing not just one part of science, but a lot. And Salvatore is experiencing this with GoodCell, right? You're not just aiming at one disease. It is any disease in which inflammation is playing a key role that now we can start to think about how are we going to monitor that? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to understand the side effects? So when we think about it that way, and there's so many good investments that you have made and are directing. So we'll have to have you back to talk about all of them. But I think the ones that kind of keep up right now, one of the ones that I think is very interesting is Nasos. And I would love to talk about that a little bit. I think it was I love your concepts about CRISPR and that being a platform and the fact that you guys were there early, and we bring that in. But Nisos is something different. I would love to talk about that a little bit because I think it, again, talks about the different ways we control inflammation and what's happening. And I think dovetails nicely with the GoodCell concept. So will you just tell us a little bit about that and how you found them and where that's going?
Sure. So Nisos is a company that, and it is going to sound crazy, that gives you an AirPod that actually helps the brain control inflammation. As crazy as an idea as it is, they actually had their first trial completed, and the data for the same was published in Lancet. And they have 3 different indications currently going through a randomized control trial. The first indication that they published was actually for rheumatoid arthritis. And, it was a single-arm trial. And in the single-arm trial, it ended up working as well as Humira and the JAK inhibitors.
That's insane.
For rheumatoid,
Yeah,
and being
because those
significantly
are
better than their
expensive
respective placebos. Yeah, they are expensive.
and have a lot of side effects, like not
Yes.
so easy to manage side effects. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. Right. In COVID, a lot of those people have had to sort of, and so what sort of got us thinking about a company in this direction was we were just getting frustrated at a personal level. So if you were to ask me what drives me, right, it's like it's saving lives, right, and saving lives fast. And it's not like, so I personally have a promise to self that I'm not going to invest in a company that won't be in the clinic and with patients within 3 years of our inception stage investment. And that will often mean that, let's pick the smallest narrow areas to sort of go in first, start trials fast, learn. And so when I was looking at what was happening with the diseases of the brain, it's taking 10 plus years for us to know something is working or not, independent of the fact that cost is that high. And so it got us thinking from a first principles perspective, maybe we are thinking about the brain wrong. It's first one of the few organs that is definitely different between us and animals. And so this classic animal-based path to new treatment development probably doesn't
that's fascinating.
work as well.
Yeah.
The second is that it's designed to actually keep drugs out. And we have a business model where we try to push drugs in. But the third is, it is getting shaped constantly all the time, consciously and subconsciously, right? Our senses, take signals and form memories and form actions. And at the same time, subconsciously, our body just works, right? The heart beats, the heart rate kind of goes up, goes down. And so it started with this feeling that maybe we need to understand how the brain communicates, and that will open up pathways that allow us to sort of control the brain. So it was great in theory, right? So who's done this kind of stuff before? So we went and every fringe idea, there's lots of people that are trying to push the frontier. And we ended up finding Constantino Salataris. And he's the only entrepreneur that had actually built a very successful company, somewhat in this concept. And he was a founder and CEO of a company called Nevro, which is a spinal cord stimulator, for pain management. And he was now sort of thinking about this concept of Nisos, and there was some theoretical work that was there. And then what gravitated us to him was this thing is that it doesn't matter. We have to really show it in the data. And in the data, we have to pick an indication where the endpoints are not debated. It's not a survey-based endpoint, right? Inflammation plays a role in psychiatry. One of the trials is in postpartum depression, right? It plays a role like migraines, right? Or like if things we don't have really good diagnostics for or clinical endpoints for, those are not the best indications to start with. So he said, we're going to go do that. We're going to take this because the FDA could have a fast approval path for a product like this as a device. It's generally safe. But the point was, it doesn't matter if it is safe. It's hard to really show it's effective. And so we are going to should create the data for it's effective. And then the FDA regulates both sort of, words, but products, but also words, right? Claims that you can make.
Mm-hmm.
And so the FDA, and so this is where the FDA approval on the effectiveness. And so the company chose the de novo path, has gotten a breakthrough designation based on the initial data set. And at a personal level, what I'm most excited about is, inflammation is a contributing factor in more than half of the disease load. And what Nisos is doing is it's basically sort of activating different centers that control the release of different cytokines and get the brain to sort of send the signals to release those cytokines. But, we live in this COVID world where we can't get vaccines to 6 billion people, but billions of people have consumer devices, phones, TVs, things like that. And so, the ability to engineer sort of the brain that way with a therapeutic device that is I just sort of get my goosebumps go up every time I think about what we can achieve with this. And this is, as I said, this will be available for patients in the next 2 years.
So this is so many things. So this is unbelievable, just the concept, right? We'll take it back for 1 second. So to the entrepreneurs who are out there who are watching, and I see some of the names that are familiar to me out there, one very important thing that Ursheet just said, which is if you are going to study something, you need an endpoint that everybody will agree with. So those somewhat wishy-washy surrogate endpoint, but not the whole community agrees on it, is probably not the fastest way to get that 3-year mark that investors who are good and who will help you get there are going to make it there. And so I think
Okay,
endpoint
Ami
is
just said,
important.
please make sure that your marker or your endpoint is approved by some of the medical field. The medical field would agree with that.
I think
that's what you just said.
That is what I just said, but I think it's really important, and we forget that sometimes. Now, having said that, there is nothing wrong with investigating, right? Because that's how we find new markers and new endpoints and different things. And so that is exploration. But I think they're two different concepts, right? There's one which is we are going to explore in these few areas, and then the other is here is the thing that we're going to take and we're going to bring to the FDA, but don't bring it to the FDA with an endpoint that they are not going to approve of, or that people in general don't agree on, or there's a lot of discontent about, because that's going to push back. And so I think that's something that's come up often, but it was just said very clearly. So I wanted to repeat that. But now if we think a little bit about what you just said. So Jen did a poll on social media, Dr. Joe.
I did do a poll. Right? I like polls.
She did a poll. And in that poll, she was asking, I think, what is the next big thing going to be, or what are you most excited about? And digital therapeutics did not come in at the top of that list. In fact, may have come in at the bottom of the list of things she offered.
Very, very bottom.
Very low. And so the reason I say that is interesting. First of all, I think sometimes people don't understand what we mean when we say digital therapeutics. So shame on us in the community. We should probably explain that more. But so today we're explaining it, right? I think what Ursheet was just describing with Nisos, the idea that people out there may not be able to get the COVID vaccine. They may not be able to get their hands on Humira for inflammation or other things, right? But everybody has a device in their hand where in behavioral health, we have seen it. We can play with those feedback loops. We can take cognitive behavioral therapy. We can put it into a device and we can start to make things happen. And that's not even using technology beyond asking you to do feedback with an app. Take that one step further, actually do something with technology. And so I think this area is one that's underappreciated right now because we don't fully understand or believe that it's going to work. And so I think that's one of the exciting things moving forward about Nisos. It makes me want to ask a question, though, of both Ursheet and Salvatore, which is, you guys are doing cutting edge kind of work. So today is exciting because all of the innovators and the, future visionaries are listening and saying, this is great. I'm going to look at my own blood. I'm going to save it. Later, it's going to save me back.
They are watching. And so can you hold on to your question?
Yes, I'm going to hold. Show us the people who are watching.
They are watching. Thank you, Christine, for giving us the thumbs up. Matthew Van Eman, MD, JD, medical device lawyer, watching from Boston. Matthew, thank you for watching and joining the show. And then Adrian Lay, who's watching from New Orleans. Adrian Lay is the only modern medicine cup. So love it. Thank you guys for watching and would love to hear any questions that you have. But Ami is going to pitch out a question now.
So my pitch, this all sounds challenging and a little bit far-fetched, but both of you are telling us that it's here and it's going to be in use. So can we talk a little bit about how these products are going to get out there to market first? Where are these platforms? Sorry, I shouldn't say product. Where are these platforms going to go? How do we help our audience understand your next steps once we prove that this is working? We have some trials that are working. The FDA says, okay. How do you decide this is going to go direct into the patient's hands? How do you decide if you want to put it with a payer? How do you decide if you want a medical society to pick it up? So maybe, Ursheet, your thoughts about it, and then Salvatore, your thoughts about where that next step comes from in your mind.
Yeah. So, when it comes to getting to patients, the FDA approval is just the license to sort of sell, right? Now, companies can choose to sort of sell directly. And so I'm actually a believer where once you have the FDA approval, a company should have a way to get the product to patients' hands and should probably have a way to discount that product in return for sort of having a real world trial arm, kind of real world evidence arm that you kind of end up controlling because you want to know that. And it's actually now much easier for companies to do that kind of stuff because you have a telemed ecosystem that is available. And you have mobile phlebotomists if you're doing diagnostics too, many other outpatient centers and things like that. And then once you have that, then you sort of have to kind of go through this long drawn out exercise of then sort of quantifying the benefit, updating sort of the standard of care, working with the American Medical Association and the specialists to kind of create any new CPT codes that may be needed, working through the reimbursement and the access and the ROI models. So, we haven't really found technology, or that process has not necessarily shrunk. It still remains. And because, in fact, I would argue that the inefficiency of that process actually is probably killing a lot of people. Because what it is doing is it is making the big pharma companies focus on drugs, which they can sell for $1 million or more. And so if you see the pipeline of new treatments coming to market, they're all in this very high price side of the house, because if it's not high priced, it won't come in quickly. And this is where I think entrepreneurs can build companies from the ground up, which can do things fundamentally differently, right? And so, sepsis is the top killer of people in hospitals. We've not had any new treatments for it for 2 decades now. And we have a founding team called Vanguard.Health, which basically has pulled together a trial network of the leading academic sort of critical care centers, and has shown that this disease is made up of multiple underlying diseases that ought to be treated differently, and then is bringing new drugs for each subtypes of this disease. But this will have gone from start to a drug in market within 3 years, but there's a high probability that they will end up effectively having to just get a pay for performance reimbursement model, because sepsis is not sort of reimbursed for separately, right? It's within the bundle payments in hospitals, and part of the reason why it actually, if you're sitting at a big pharma company that's worth a few $100 billion and trying to say, where do we go next? Well, oncology, people will live for 5 years. We can sell them $1 million treatments, and even if they don't work, it's okay, right? There's going to be a bunch of things to something like this, where people will die within 4 hours. And oh, by the way, the economic model is it's kind of coming in bundled payments. But all of those factors. So when you then start thinking about a platform company, you do need to it's not just the science and the product. It's all of these other things. And then after that, you see the pharma or the sales reps kind of show up, and the TV ads showing up, and that's kind of beyond that. But that's the full thing that needs to happen. And actually, a lot of you have a lot to say in it, because one of the key enabling entities that sort of guides this process is the American Medical Association.
Oh no, Ursheet did a call to action to all of the medical physicians out there.
That's right.
Please, Ursheet, continue your call to action. No. We need a call to action.
Yeah, and so I think it's in some of these cases, right? While it'll take often years, to for in quotes all this ROI data. In many ways, right? I think in healthcare we sometimes do evidence-based medicine to the extreme. The most egregious example here is, and I'll call out Dr. Fauci for saying that there is no evidence that the masks work. It's like the first 101 principle of the physics of droplets tells you that if you have a barrier, it won't travel as far. So we would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives if we had not made the concept of wearing masks controversial in the first place. And frankly, right, it works as well as a vaccine. So mask plus a vaccine is clearly going to be a better solution. So there are times when and whenever somebody is asking for, in quotes, a lot of this evidence over common sense, it costs real dollars, because most of the money in the development of new products in healthcare goes in quotes, creating evidence and data. And it is so easy for anyone to say, oh, I need that, or I want that. And just be mindful of that, because every time you're doing that, you are sort of adding friction to anything new coming in.
What I love about all of this, MedTech Insights, working with you, Dr. Joe, and all of this is we are no longer in silos. And I think that is, that we have come together, because the academic conversation I had not 2 hours earlier today was yet another rant on randomized controlled trials, right? And why is it taking us so long is the RCT dead? We had a very interesting academic conversation, but the concept is similar, which is when we know things are working, how do we make sure that our patients are safe and yet move things along in a way that they're not only safe and then suffering more morbidity because we took too long, but safe and actually getting better faster? And how do you balance that? So Salvatore, let's turn over to you.
So super important, and I'm super glad that we're about to turn over to Salvatore. Thank you to Carlos Montilla, PhD research student at the Multidisciplinary Institute for Research in Pediatrics Pathologies. That's actually very detailed. But maybe you understand what Salvatore is saying with GoodCell.
Right.
Watching from Argentina. He says, hi, everyone. Congratulations. Excellent initiatives. Thank you, Carlos, for watching. Okay, sorry, Ami, back to your question.
Back over to Salvatore. Would love to think about GoodCell and the next steps now, right? Where does one go now? Patients can do this. They can bank their own blood for these 3 different concepts, right? Of storing it for the just in case later, of following markers for what's happening now, of watching for signs of inflammation, other things that are coming. Where do we go next? How does somebody like you think about that for our audience?
Sure. So from GoodCell's perspective, we continue to build a platform that's really promotes precision medicine. And so the ability to store these cells at their healthiest state for things that are not so futuristic, right? There are FDA approved CAR T therapies. There are hundreds of trials going on around stem cells for various diseases. The understanding that not all these cells are the same for the manufacturing process, to be able to measure genetically what kind of damage these cells may be introduced to a patient. So being able to store your cells at their healthiest and select the ones that have the least amount of damage. And then really to create a platform that you'll understand your overall health, not the way we've been looking at it traditionally, is really to combine every single biomarker, every single genetic predisposition that's inherited, and looking things or tracking over time. For us, tracking over time is really key because, for every single state, understanding where you are and how quickly you're changing is going to be important. And you talk about like clinical trials. The one thing is that what's been lacking in clinical trials is really precision recruiting. And so the GoodCell platform really allows the member to have access to potentially trials that are looking specifically for their genetic predisposition, their dynamic genetics, and what biomarker levels they have, and their family history. And so I think a lot of people talk about precision medicine. I think GoodCell gives the member the tools to really have control of their precision medicine.
Oh, we'll love this conversation. We could go on. I see that it is 12:46, so we're 1 minute over the time lapse that we allow ourselves. I will take this opportunity to say thank you, Dr. Viscomi. Thank you, Ursheet Parikh, for being with us. We really hope to have both of you back because there is so much more left to discuss in the work that you're both doing. But really honored to see the work that you're doing, to be part of kind of thinking about this and listening to it and engaging together, making sure that we have entrepreneurs and researchers and investors and then clinicians who are working as a team to bring these things to market and to bring them in a way that we really change the way we look at healthcare, that it's no longer saving somebody later when something has already happened, but thinking about things earlier and moving the platforms to a place where we can all share some really, really great ideas and data. Jen, I will give you the last word.
Really appreciate everyone for joining. We have so many comments that are questions that are coming in. So thank you. Really appreciate that everyone joined from across the country and across the world. Thank you to Salvatore and Ursheet. This is the end of MedTech Insights. We hope you join us again next Tuesday. Thank you to our guests and to our audience. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you, Jen, Ami, Salvatore, and thank you all.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.